and welcome to Data Collection with Qubits Education. In this lecture, you will know what types of data collection techniques you can use, write questions and critique questions in questionnaires. You will understand some key terms and know some different methods of sampling, and you will also answer, or at least take part in answering some GCSE exam questions. Okay, so first of all, let's start with questionnaires. So this lecture will go through quite a lot of information. Try and take some really detailed notes, especially when looking at the types of questionnaire exam questions that you could get. And you also need to remember some of the key terms, and I'll try to highlight which ones are the most important. All of them are important, but I will highlight which ones, you could revise if you think you can't remember all of them. Okay, so questionnaires. So in GCSE papers, you tend to have to do two things with questionnaires. You will have to say what's wrong with a given question and say how you would rewrite it. So for example, Ben wants to find out what food people like to eat in restaurants. So he asks his family, do you agree that pizza is better than pasta? What's wrong with this survey? So first of all, that's a 2-mark question, so you need to write down two things. Now, if you say, do you agree that pizza is better than pasta, you're not really giving them much choice. So it's a biased question because of the way he's worded it. Don't you agree? Or do you agree? So he's trying to get you to agree anyway, by the way he's worded the question. Probably not intentionally. He's only asked his family, so, very restricted sample of people. He doesn't specify a range of foods, he just says pizza or pasta. And it's not really anything to do with eating habits, okay? So, as of the question, Ben wants to find out what food people like to eat in restaurants. Well, people doesn't just mean his family, and restaurants doesn't just mean Italian. Okay, let's have a look at another question. Naomi wants to find out how often people go to the cinema. She uses this question on a questionnaire. How many times do you go to the cinema? Not very often, sometimes, a lot. Write down two things wrong with this question. And again, that's 2 marks. So here are the things that she did wrong. So for a start, there's no time scale. So that it doesn't say like one time a week. It doesn't say like, over a week or over a month or a year. The boxes are just not very, it's not going to give you detailed information. You need to know 1 time a week, 1 time a month, more than 5 times, whatever. Okay, and yes, vague labels as well. So, criticizing questions. So here, what is your age in years? You get 1 mark for saying what is wrong with this question. So have a think about it. What do you think is wrong with that question? Okay, so as you can see, we have overlapping regions here. Where are we? 20 to 30, 30 to 40. So you need to kind of have, between 20 and 29, 30 and 39, whatever. Okay, so overlapping regions. Now, how many texts, so this is a different question altogether. How many texts have you sent on your mobile phone? List 2 things wrong with this question. So this could be, someone's trying to find out how many times you use your phone a day or how many texts you send a day. And again, he's been very vague with this question. So he has overlapping regions. He has no time frame, per day, per week, per month. He is just very, very vague. You're not really going to get very good research out of a question like that. And I know you might not think this is important to you now, even if you think that your GCSE it isn't that important. But these kind of things are really helpful when you maybe go to uni or in work, when you're doing market research, depending on what your choice of career is, and things like that. So it's very good to understand this type of thing. You will have to do a research project if you're doing, a foundation course, an undergraduate, anything like that. So improving and writing questions then. So another thing that you will be asked then is to improve the question. So here is Naomi's question again. Naomi wants to find out how often people go to the cinema. How many times do you go to the cinema? Not very often, sometimes a lot. A is to write down 2 things wrong with this question, giving you 2 marks. And B is to design a better question for her questionnaire to find out how often adults go to the cinema. you should include some response boxes. So for question A, write down 2 things wrong with this question. I'm trying to think if I did that. So I've done B first anyway. How many times did you go to the cinema last month? So she has a time frame. She has clear boxes, 0, 1 to 2, 3 to 5, more than 5. It's very unlikely someone's going to go to the cinema more than 5 times a month. Well, to me it is anyway. So 2 things wrong with her question. So obviously we've already written down the 2 things wrong with her question. Sorry, here. Where did we write it? Just here. So we've written down the few things that are wrong with her question. No timescale, non-exhaustive response boxes, and very vague labels. So if we go back to this question then now. So we've already answered A, and you've got your 2 marks. B is to design the question, which we have done. Now the mark scheme points out that you will get a mark for the time period, meaning you've put month, you said last month, and you'll get a mark for you having 3 non-overlapping response boxes. So 0, 1 to 2, 3 to 5, more than 5. Don't overlap those numbers in your boxes, okay? Alright, so I hope that made sense. Sorry, I was a little bit quick with that question. Okay, so here is another question. Valerie is the manager of a supermarket. She wants to find out how often people shop at her supermarket. She will use a questionnaire. Design a suitable question for Valerie to use on her questionnaire. You must include some response boxes. 2 marks. So if you want to pause the video and have a go at working out or have a go at writing a question for this, she wants to find out how often people shop at her supermarket. Okay, so pause the video and have a go. Okay, if you've had a go at the question, let's have a look. So how many times each week do you shop at this supermarket? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 or more. Okay, so box 1 for an appropriate question with a reference to a time period or a question with time period implied by responses. So that means that you will get a mark for having your time period. Now, your time period is here each week, which is great. And then you get a mark for the 3 non-overlapping boxes. Well, obviously we've got more than 3, but that's fine as well. Okay. And obviously, again, are you really going to visit the supermarket more than 4 times? I mean, in 1 week. So it's a perfectly valid question. So there is also something called question bias. Now, question bias is where the way you write the question might change the answers given. So how much does the wording of a question change the results? Now, in 2001, there was an English and Welsh national census. Okay, and in 2001, the question was, what is your religion? And 15.7% of people responded, no religion. However, in the British Social Attitude Survey of 2002, the question was worded, do you regard yourself as belonging to any particular religion? And in this survey, 50.5% of people responded as having no religion. So it depends on how you ask the question as to what your response may be and how reliable your data is. Now, here are some key terms that you must know, so please make sure you take some notes. We have 2 types of data, really. So we have discrete data and continuous data. Now, discrete data is numerical data, so numbers, but it can only be certain values, so a whole number, like the number of children in a classroom or your shoe size. It is an exact number, okay? You can't have 5.5 children. You might be able to have a 5.5 shoe, but we don't really do that anymore. It's probably a size 4 or 5 or a 10. We don't really do point shoes. Some people do who've got a little bit extra foot. Anyway, sorry, I digress. And continuous data is numerical data, again, numbers, that can take any value within a given range. So, for example, the masses of 10 babies, so that just means the weight. So a weight could be any value. It's not just a whole number. It could be 10.5 or whatever. Or the height of some adults. So again, that could be, if you put 2 or 3 adults together, you might get, 18 feet. You've got some really tall adults. And they're all 6 foot. Just easy math. Okay, so you must remember discrete data is basically whole numbers and continuous data is decimals. Now, the other two pieces of information that you need to remember are quantitative and qualitative data. Qualitative data is data that can only be written in words, so not numbers. Okay, so for example, qualitative data will not be any of these because these are all numbers, these are numerical. Okay, so qualitative data could be the colours of cars in a car park. Okay, or the names of your pigs in your farm, whatever, it's words, you cannot put it into numbers. Whereas quantitative, which reminds me, like if I say quantity meaning amount, then that's numbers, data that is written as numbers, for example the heights of children. Okay, so just remember these are quantitative types of data, and we have discrete and continuous, and then we have qualitative on its own, just being words. Okay, so make sure you remember those. Now, let's have a quick look at tally charts. So, the type of question that you could get in the exam, Philip is going to carry out a survey of the football teams supported by each of his friends. In the space below, draw a suitable data collection sheet that Philip could use. Now, you get 3 marks for this question, and it's really easy. People really struggle with these because they're not sure what to do, but really what you're doing is you've got to try and find out what football teams they support, okay? And you're going to ask your friends, but it doesn't say you have to use all the teams. So it's you could do it as like a team here where they write their team, okay, and then the tally would be there, and then your frequency would be there. So for example, if say somebody wrote Manchester United and then put a tally next to their name, and then somebody wrote Liverpool and put a tally, but then the next person that came along liked Manchester United, so he just put a tally. And then the next person that came along liked Man City, so he wrote that and put a tally. But the more people that come, the more people will add to your tally. And then all you do is count up those tallies, and that's what goes in your frequency box. Now, it doesn't matter because you don't actually have to do it. That's the point of this question. You don't actually have to find out any information. This is the answer. This is a data collection sheet that Philip could use. It's not asking you. So people tend to think that you've got to write in some football teams and things like that. You haven't. You haven't got to do anything. You get 3 marks, 1 mark for each column heading. So team, tally, frequency. That's it. You don't actually have to go and find any data. You're just drawing out a collection sheet. Okay, sorry, I know I'm being really patronising, I don't mean to. It's just, I just don't need to get confused by it and take too long in the exam, wasting time trying to think what they're asking you to do when, it can be this easy. Okay, so let's talk about sampling then. So when we have different types of data, different data can be collected in different ways. So sampling is a method of choosing a smaller group or representative group of respondents, so who we can conduct research with, instead of like an entire population of people. So why do firms or like marketing firms or any business that's trying to sell something sample? So why would Coca-Cola go out and do a survey? So cost. So market research can be expensive. So they would sample, meaning they wouldn't survey the entire population. They would take a sample of people because it's cheaper. Okay, so market research can be expensive, and taking a sample is going to be much cheaper because it's less people. But then they would hope that they would represent a larger population. Sampling also takes less time. Businesses often need information gathered from market research quickly. Okay, so that's 2 of the main reasons why companies would sample rather than take the entire population. So a population then, as I've already explained, might not necessarily be everyone in the country or even everyone on the planet. Okay, it could be the total number of people who could be included in a particular survey. So if you're going to do a sample of the workforce, then the population would be everybody who is actually in employment. You wouldn't have to ask people that are unemployed or stay-at-home mums or teenagers about the workforce because they're not in work. So certain sampling methods then, so you could have random sampling. So random sampling is where everyone in the population has an equal chance of being included in the survey. So it's kind of like a pick your name out of a hat type of thing, except I'm sure they're using a computer. I doubt they would have a giant hat with everybody's name in it from England or wherever. Okay, so for example, what is your favorite flavor of ice cream? Do you like marshmallows on your ice cream? What is your favorite brand of ice cream? Okay, so you would choose random people within the population because most people do like ice cream. All right. So, quota sampling then. So, quota sampling attempts to select the individuals in the survey in relation to the characteristics of the overall market or population. So, for example, if you are testing out a new lipstick, the most likely you would choose women to survey. Or if you are trying to figure out if a new toy is going to be liked by children, you would survey children between a certain age range. Quota sampling is often used in market research. Interviewers are required to find cases with particular characteristics. They're given quota of particular types of people to interview, and the quota are organised so that final samples should be representative of population, meaning that what their answers are should represent the whole of the population, the whole of the country or planet or workplace or whatever. Now, stratified sampling is something that there will be a video on that as well separately. So that's where the population is divided into smaller groups, which are the ones most likely to be interested in the product being researched. So, as I was saying earlier about the children. Within the selected group, a random or quota sample may be used to determine the actual respondents. So, stratified sampling is where we would take a percentage of people. Like I say, there is a separate video on that, and I do suggest you watch it because it's a lot more detailed. So, cluster sampling is used when it's difficult to gather information on the entire population and where it's known that the required information could be gathered from one selection or group in the hopes that this smaller group is representative of the whole population. So, what that means is you know that the answers given by a certain cluster of people will give you the answers you need to do what is required for the entire population in terms of your business and what you're selling. So you would do a cluster sample instead. Systematic sampling is where a formula is used. So, for example, nice and easy, every 10th person is chosen, okay, to select the people in the research. All right, so convenience sampling, that's where any non-scientific method is used to help the speed of response and to lower the cost. So that could be anything. You could choose what that is. Now, understanding which method should be chosen is sometimes difficult, but each method has its advantages and disadvantages. But depending on which one you're going to choose, it all depends on the need for accuracy, so how accurate it needs to be, how much time you have, and how much money you have to do this research. So if you're just doing so for example, I did a research study on the education of people on probation and if it would help them to get back into work and to lower the rates of reoffending. So in order to do that, I had no money. I was able to ask the Leicestershire Probation Service if I could do um, some questionnaires and some interviews, which they let me. So I just had about 20 questionnaires and probably about 10 interviews, which isn't a gigantic amount, but it enabled me to, get a good idea of how the education within the probation service helps people get back on track and to kind of do more with their lives and to stay away from prison or offending in general. So, in order to do that, coming up with the questionnaires, I had to do that very quickly. The time available to me was, it wasn't a lot. So, I got my questionnaires printed, done, went to the place, did the questionnaires, did the interviews. My research budget was low. I got all my stuff printed at uni. My accuracy, it needed to be good. It was for my research project for my dissertation. So, I had to make sure that my questions were valid. So there was a lot going into it. So again, like I say, these things will be needed when you do go on to do more courses. So it's great to be able to learn it now and to use something from your GCSE, which you may use again. Okay, so the sample size. Now, choosing a sample size, if it's larger, then the more reliable it will be. So let's say you're interviewing women on pregnancy and I don't know. So if the more women you choose to interview, the more accurate your results will be. However, larger sample size obviously has greater costs. and time, in terms of money and time. And sample size should relate closely to the size of the specific population. So basically in a ratio. So if you've got 10,000 people, and you don't want to interview 10,000 people, obviously, you must choose a certain amount of people within ratio to that amount, which I will explain in stratified sampling in the video. So please go and watch it. Don't forget. Okay, so reliability of sampling then. Now, when you're doing a research study for a business or things like that, a 95% confidence level is usually expected when conducting research, which means it has to be very accurate. So it means that findings are likely to be correct 19 times out of 20. So that's really good to know in terms of British surveys. Sometimes you're just not sure about those British surveys. Okay, exam questions on random sampling then. So describe a random sample. So in your exam, if they ask you to describe a random sample, this is the answer you need to give. A sample where each thing in the population is equally likely to be chosen. Question 2. You want to take a random sample of students' favourite TV programmes at school. Describe how you can achieve a random sample. So if you're going to achieve a random sample, since it's random, you need to ensure that each thing is equally likely to be chosen. So the mark scheme would expect that you could say something like put all students' names into a hat and pick them out to decide who to sample, or use a random number generator where each number represents a student. Okay, so something as simple as that. And these are really good questions to be able to know the answers to and just like know them, and if you get them in the exam, just write them down. Question 3 then, it says that Dave wants to determine the spending habits of the UK population. The spending habits, okay? He stands outside HSBC Bank's headquarters and asks the first 10 people he sees. Suggest 2 reasons why his sample will likely be poor. So, first of all, it's not a random sample, it's asking people walking into a bank who probably work there, so they're more likely to earn more money. It's also a very small sample size for saying that he wants to know the spending habits of the UK population. He needs to be moving around the UK a little bit more to find out more information about that. Because one, you can have a really poor area, not spending a lot, and then you can have a really rich area, spending tons of money, giving you a really bad kind of range in terms of high and low income. Okay, so sample bias exam questions. So they will ask you about bias. If you don't know what bias is or you can't remember, it's like where it's one-sided. Okay, so the fact that the question where the guy asked, do you agree that pizza is better than pasta? Well, that's bias already because he's saying you agree. It's a leading question. You might have seen that on some like courtroom dramas. So in this question, Melanie wants to find out how often people go to the cinema. She gives a questionnaire to all the women leaving a cinema, all the women leaving a cinema. Her sample is biased. Give 2 possible reasons. Well, it says Melanie wants to find out how often people go to the cinema. Well, first of all, she's asking people leaving the cinema. So obviously they're going to be cinema goers, more likely than not. Okay, so they probably go to the cinema more often than someone who you might see outside John Lewis or whatever. But you must ask people in different areas. You can't just ask people at the cinema because it's saying how often people in general go to the cinema. Well, people in general don't always hang around outside cinemas. And also, only women were asked. Well, you need to ask men and children, unless it specifies adults, but it doesn't. So it might do that in the exam for you. But if it doesn't, you can say, you need to ask men and women, or you need to ask a wider more people, a wider population. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information and we have covered a lot of key things in there, especially about questionnaires and drawing the data collection sheets. Okay, so they're really important things to remember and easy marks. Okay, so I hope now that you know what types of data collection techniques you can use. So by that I mean like the tally chart and different types of sampling and the questionnaires. Write questions and critique questions in questionnaires, which you have done. You should now understand some key terms. It's those 4 key terms that I want you to remember the most: discrete data, continuous data, qualitative data, and quantitative data. You know different methods of sampling. Yes, I went through them quickly. It's rare that they will ask too many questions about sampling in the exam. However, just remind yourselves of those just in case. And you have answered some GCSE exam questions. That was quite a long lecture with a lot of information, so well done. Thank you so much for using Cubit Education, and I look forward to seeing you next time.